Mayor Dellums, recent events, including the deficit and the firing of the city administrator, have shaken residents' confidence in city government's ability to manage taxpayer resources. In addition, there's lingering disenchantment with how the city has managed Measure Y, namely the promise of 63 PSOs for each of the beats. What assurance can you provide voters that the city will fulfill the promise of Measure Y and Measure NN?
We now have 57 problem-solving officers for the first time. One problem-solving officer for each beat. When you add the sergeants that supervise these 57 people, we now are at 63. So whatever happened in the past is the past. On our watch, we have achieved 63. We maintained our commitment to the residents of Oakland that we would, and I said this in January, that we would get to 803. And part of that 803 is the 63. We're already there with respect to the 63. On this coming Friday, we will be at 800. On the 14th of November, we will exceed 803. We will be at approximately 820. So that answered that first part. So your question has already been dealt with very cleanly in that respect. Number two, with respect to the budget deficit, I walked through that very meticulously. I will not attempt to do that again here, but simply say to you that a major part of the budget deficit here had nothing to do at all, sir, with mismanagement. It had to do with the fact that there is no economic shield over the city of Oakland. When we are in global economic difficulty, we feel it in Oakland. When we are in national economic difficulty, we feel it in Oakland. When we are in state economic difficulty, we feel it in Oakland. We lost property transfer tax when the bottom fell out of the real estate market. That is a reality, my friend. So that the budget deficit that Oakland dealt with two things: the shortfall in anticipated revenue given the economic downturn on the one hand, and over expenditure on the other hand by virtue of underfunding, overtime, backfill, training, etc., primarily on the side of the police department carrying out a number of functions. All right? So that issue, we need to dispel the point. So this notion that in some way we're talking about the budget deficit being an issue of mismanagement, that was not there based on the deficit that we were trying to deal with. But with respect to the structural problems in the budget, and that is negative fund balances in a number of our funds, I would simply say to you that these were practices that we inherited. We're going forward with integrity. We have kept our promises in this regard. We walked through the budget. The budget was overwhelmingly approved by members of the City Council. So we have come together as one. We have addressed this matter as a family. We have addressed it as a unit. We have spoken with one voice. And what we have continued to say to the residents of Oakland, that we believe in openness, transparency, and accountability, and we've made every single effort to do that.
Can 803 be sustained without Measure NN with the existing city resources?
My answer to you is that I believe we need Measure NN to sustain the 803 and meet our ongoing needs. It will be extremely difficult to maintain the integrity of that without Measure NN.
So then Measure NN doesn't include a detailed plan about what officers would be assigned to what units and things of that nature? Or is there a detailed plan associated with it?
One of the things that I wanted to make sure we did not get into was what I consider the problem of Measure Y, which was to micromanage and define in such unequivocal terms that there's no flexibility. So that what we need to do is build a police force based on need, and to start laying that out in a piece of legislation, in my humble opinion, as we started to talk about this, was micromanaging and building in a level of inflexibility that at the end of the day doesn't ultimately meet our needs. So that the way it was written in a way to give us maximum flexibility to do what it is we need to do. But we understood that we needed to flesh out the detective side of it, flush out the investigative side of it, and that's been done. But what we didn't want to do was to get down to how many officers would do this and how many officers would do that. That's not a way to administer. So I'm here in this last week to focus this attention, to say to people, A, this is a need for this community, B, we can sustain this effort, and C, this is an affordable effort here. And if everyone understands the economic circumstances that we're in, if we don't tax ourselves some, then you begin to reduce the percentage of our overall budget that goes for other services. And I don't think that's what this community wants. But I do think that this community does want more police officers to carry out the functions that Deputy Chief Lohman spoke very clearly and very cleanly and very eloquently to. I think they do want that. At some point, you got to pay for it. Nothing comes free. And I think in this city, a city of this size, our police force is smaller than most police forces of our size anywhere in the country. And I think Measure NN gets us to a place where I think we need to be.
One of the decisions that was made 25 years ago, when Lionel Wilson was still the mayor, was to civilianize the police department. And a number of functions that are part of police departments everywhere else, like parking enforcement, dealing with crosswalks, school safety, all those kinds of issues, were farmed out to other departments. And so, probably for Deputy Chief Lohman, is there some thought long-term to looking at reintegrating in a strategic plan those kinds of functions? Because one of the issues that keeps coming up in community meetings that relates is that if somebody calls the police department, there's nobody else is around after 5 o'clock. So if you call for a parking enforcement issue, you call for something that's considered a non-police service. You're told it's not a police priority, and you can't get the service. Is there some vision or some thought about down the line reintegrating all of the traditional police responsibilities and functions?
That is exactly what the police service technicians they would be doing, performing those functions. Exactly what you described, and they would be working around the clock to provide additional services so that you didn't have to wait for an officer who would be tagged doing something that's more commensurate with their classification.
We all know that Oakland is growing, and Oakland's going to continue to grow, and at some point Oakland is going to grow rather quickly. And that means that we ought to be anticipatory. We need to look toward the future, and I think Measure NN takes a longer view. It is looking toward the future to try to speak not only to our immediate needs, but to our long-term needs and to our comprehensive strategy of prevention, enforcement, intervention, and sustainability.